The autumn wind carried dust across the wooden platform of Redemption Creek Station, swirling it around the worn boots of travelers and the polished shoes of townspeople gathered for the afternoon train. The air smelled of coal smoke and prairie grass, that particular scent of endings and beginnings that clung to every frontier depot in Wyoming Territory. Violet Brennan stood alone near the edge of the platform, her fingers gripping the handle of a battered leather trunk. She had traveled 3 days and 2 nights from Boston, sleeping in hard seats, eating stale bread, watching the civilized world of brick buildings and gas lamps give way to endless sky and empty land. Her blue calico dress, the nicest one she owned, had gathered dust despite her best efforts to keep it clean. The fabric clung to her back in the heat, and a strand of dark brown hair had escaped her carefully pinned bun, falling across her cheek like a question mark. She was 24 years old. She had $3.60 folded inside her glove. She had a dead mother, a father buried 5 years past, and a brother she could not save. She had crossed half a continent to marry a man she had never met, a man whose letters had promised her safety and a future and a place to call home. The train behind her hissed steam and began to pull away, its whistle cutting through the afternoon quiet like a knife. The handful of passengers who had disembarked with her had already been collected by family or friends, swept into embraces and loaded into wagons. She watched them go, their laughter fading into the distance, leaving her standing in a silence that felt like judgment. A man on horseback appeared at the far end of the platform, riding hard. His horse kicked up a cloud of dust that rolled across the wooden planks like fog. He wore a vest with an embroidered letter H on the chest, the stitching bold and new. He was not old, perhaps 30, with a clean-shaven face and eyes that held no warmth. He did not dismount. He simply reined his horse to a stop 15 feet from where Violet stood, and from his saddlebag he pulled a rolled piece of paper tied with string. The gathering of townspeople, perhaps 20 souls who had come to see the train arrive, turned to watch. Conversations died. A woman in a green bonnet nudged her companion. A man in a dusty suit coat straightened his hat. The rider untied the string with deliberate slowness. The paper unrolled with a crackling sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. He cleared his throat. "Attention," he called out, his voice carrying across the platform like a town crier announcing news of war or weather. Message from Mr. Garrett Harrison of Harrison Ranch to Miss Violet Brennan of Boston, Massachusetts. Violet felt her stomach drop. Every eye turned toward her. She wanted to run, to disappear, to sink through the wooden boards beneath her feet. But she stood frozen, her hand still gripping her trunk, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. The messenger began to read, his tone flat and businesslike, as if he were reciting a bill of sale for livestock. "Miss Brennan, upon reviewing your recent correspondence and photograph, I find our arrangement incompatible with my standards. I hereby withdraw my proposal of marriage. A ticket back to Boston will be arranged. Do not attempt further contact. Signed, G. Harrison." The words fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples through the crowd. Violet heard a woman gasp. She heard a man cough to cover a laugh. She heard whispers beginning to spread like wildfire through dry grass. "Poor thing. All this way for nothing. Harrison sure knows how to kick them to the curb. Wonder what was wrong with her." The messenger rolled the paper back up, tied it with the string, and tucked it into his vest pocket. He touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy, turned his horse, and rode away without another word. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly, leaving behind only the whispers and the wind. Violet stood perfectly still. She had learned long ago that stillness could sometimes protect you, that if you held yourself very carefully, you might keep from breaking into pieces. Her hands trembled. She forced them to be still. Her eyes burned. She forced herself not to blink, not to let the tears gathering there spill over where everyone could see. She bent slowly, picking up her small purse from where it rested against her trunk. The clasp was old, the leather cracked, Her fingers fumbled with it. The purse slipped from her grasp and fell, hitting the platform with a soft thud. The clasp broke open. Coins spilled out, rolling in every direction, glinting in the afternoon sun like scattered pieces of her dignity. A nickel rolled past a woman's boot. A penny stopped against the leg of a bench. 2 dimes clinked together and settled in a crack between boards. Violet dropped to her knees. She reached for the nearest coin, a quarter that had landed near her trunk. Her hand shook so badly she could barely pick it up. She reached for another and another, gathering them into her palm with the desperate focus of someone who knows that every cent matters, that $3.60 is the difference between eating and starving, between shelter and the open sky. A small figure darted forward from the crowd, a boy perhaps 8 years old, with sandy hair and a face full of freckles. He knelt beside her and began picking up coins, placing them carefully in her palm without a word. His hands were small and quick, and there was something in his face, a kind of fierce concentration that made Violet want to weep. When the last coin had been gathered, the boy looked up at her. His eyes were serious, older than his years. "Do not listen to them, miss," he said quietly. "My ma says Mr. Harrison has got a cold heart. Says any woman who marries him would be trading one kind of prison for another." Violet managed to nod. She reached into her palm, now holding her meager fortune once more, and pulled out a single dime. She pressed it into the boy's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. The boy closed his fingers around the coin, nodded once with the solemnity of a preacher, and ran back to where a thin woman in a faded dress stood watching. The woman met Violet's eyes for just a moment. There was sympathy there and something else. Recognition, perhaps. The look of one who had also known what it meant to be judged by a town, to be found wanting, to stand alone in a place that offered no shelter. The crowd began to disperse. The show was over. They had other business, other lives, other concerns. Within minutes, the platform was nearly empty. A station master emerged from the small building, an older man with a lined face and kind eyes. He walked toward Violet slowly, giving her time to compose herself. "Miss," he said gently, "you have folks coming to collect you?" Violet stood, brushing dust from her skirt with hands that still trembled. She looked at the trunk at her feet, at the empty platform stretching away in both directions, at the town beyond with its dusty street and weathered buildings. "I thought I did," she said. The station master nodded slowly, as if he had heard that answer before. He looked at her trunk, at her face, at the way she held herself like someone trying not to shatter. "You got money for a room?" he asked. Violet calculated quickly. $3.50 now, after giving the boy his dime. A room would cost at least 50 cents a night, maybe more. Food would cost another 20 or 30 cents a day. She might have a week, maybe less, before she was completely without resources. "I will manage," she said. The station master's expression suggested he doubted this, but he was too polite to say so. "Town has got no hotel," he said. "Boarding house might have a room, but Mrs. Fletcher keeps it pretty full. You could ask." Violet nodded. She bent to lift her trunk, gripping the leather handles on either end. It was heavier than she remembered, packed with everything she owned in the world. 3 dresses, her mother's Bible, a worn copy of Whitman's poems, a small box containing her sewing tools, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, a single photograph of a young man with serious eyes and a mouth that was learning not to smile, her brother Daniel. 16 years old the last time she had seen him, being led away in chains. The trunk rose only a few inches before her arms began to shake. She set it down again, breathing hard, feeling the weight of exhaustion and humiliation, and 3 days of travel pressing down on her like a physical force. "I can leave it here for now," she asked the station master. "Until sundown," he said. "After that, I lock up." Violet looked at the sun, already beginning its descent toward the western horizon. She had perhaps 3 hours. "Thank you," she said. She turned and walked toward the town, leaving her trunk behind, carrying only her broken purse and her shattered expectations. The main street of Redemption Creek stretched before her, a wide dirt road lined with wooden buildings that had seen better days. A general store, a blacksmith shop, a saloon with faded paint and swinging doors, a church with a small steeple, a handful of houses scattered beyond like seeds thrown carelessly across hard ground. She passed a woman sweeping the porch of the general store. The woman glanced up, recognized her as the humiliated bride from the station, and quickly looked away. Violet kept walking. She passed the saloon, where the sound of rough laughter drifted out into the street along with the smell of whiskey and tobacco. She passed the church, its door closed, its windows dark. At the end of the street stood a two-story building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Fletcher's Boarding House." Violet climbed the steps, her legs heavy with fatigue, and knocked on the door. A woman answered, thin and tired-looking, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked Violet up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had seen many travelers and learned to judge them quickly. "Help you," she said. "I am looking for a room," Violet said, "just for a few nights while I sort out my situation." The woman's expression softened slightly, and Violet realized she must have heard about what happened at the station. News traveled fast in small towns. "I have got one room left," the woman said. 50 cents a night, payable in advance. No men, no drinking, no noise after 9 o'clock. Violet reached into her purse and counted out 50 cents. The woman took it and stepped aside. "Up the stairs, second door, on the right. Supper is at 6 if you want it, 20 cents extra." Violet climbed the narrow staircase, her hand trailing along a banister worn smooth by years of use. The second-floor hallway was dim and smelled of old wood and lamp oil. She found the second door, pushed it open, and stepped into a small room barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. A small window looked out over the back of the building toward the prairie beyond, where the land rolled away in waves of golden grass beneath an endless sky. She sat on the bed. The mattress was thin but clean. She removed her gloves, folded them carefully, and placed them on the chair. She removed her hat, setting it beside the gloves. She unlaced her boots, pulled them off, and set them side by side beneath the bed. Then, finally, she allowed herself to cry. The tears came silently at first, sliding down her cheeks in hot tracks, dripping from her chin onto her hands folded in her lap. Then deeper, harder, shaking her shoulders, forcing sounds from her throat that she muffled against her palms. She cried for the humiliation at the station. She cried for the 3 days of hope she had carried across the country like a precious cargo, now shattered. She cried for her mother, dead of consumption 6 years past. She cried for her father, who had drunk himself to death in the year that followed. She cried for Daniel, her baby brother, locked away in a reform school for a crime born of desperation. She cried until there were no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and hollowed out. Then she stood, poured water from the pitcher into the wash basin, and cleaned her face. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair was a mess, but she was still here, still standing, still alive. She had survived worse, losing her parents, starvation, eviction, the grinding poverty that crushed people into dust. This public humiliation was just one more trial to endure. This humiliation was just one more trial to endure, and the kind of grinding poverty that crushed people into dust. She would survive this too. The sun was setting when she made her way back to the station. The station master was preparing to close up, but her trunk still sat where she had left it. She tried again to lift it, managed to drag it a few feet before her arms gave out. She stood there, breathing hard, trying to calculate whether she could drag it all the way back to the boarding house in stages. A shadow fell across the platform. She looked up. A man stood a few feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing worn denim trousers, a faded shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. His face was weathered by sun and wind, creased around the eyes and mouth in ways that spoke of hard living. His eyes were a startling blue, clear as creek water, and they held something she could not quite name. Not pity, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something like recognition. "You got a place to sleep tonight?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. Violet straightened, pride stiffening her spine despite her exhaustion. "I will manage," she said. The man looked at her trunk, at the darkening sky, at the empty street beyond. "Town has got no hotel," he said. "Boarding house is full up." "I have a room there," Violet said. The man raised an eyebrow, surprised. Then he looked at her more carefully, taking in her dusty dress, her tired eyes, the set of her shoulders. "You the one Harrison turned down," he said. It was not a question. Violet felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "News travels fast," she said. The man shrugged. "Small town? Not much else to talk about." They stood in silence for a moment. The station master appeared in the doorway, key in hand, waiting to lock up. "I can help you with that trunk," the man said. "Get it to Fletcher's." "I do not need charity," Violet said. The man almost smiled. It was not much, just a slight shift at the corner of his mouth, but it changed his face somehow, made him look less like a weathered stranger and more like a human being who understood something about pride and its costs. "Not offering charity," he said. "Offering work. Got a proposition for you if you are interested in listening." Violet looked at him carefully. She had learned to be cautious with men, to watch for the signs of danger, the hints of cruelty or lust or violence that sometimes hid behind offers of help. But this man's eyes were steady and clear. His hands hung loose at his sides, not reaching, not threatening. He stood at a respectful distance, giving her space to refuse. "What kind of work?" she asked. "The kind that pays," he said. "Not much, but enough. Room and board, $2 a week. Mostly cooking and cleaning. Some help with a kid who needs looking after. Nothing more than that. You keep your door locked if it makes you feel safer. I do not come around uninvited." Violet felt something shift in her chest, a small easing of the terrible pressure that had been building there since the messenger read that letter aloud. This was not rescue. This was not romance. This was business, plain and simple, and somehow that made it easier to consider. "Who is the child?" she asked. "Boy named Jesse, 10 years old. He is my friend's grandson. Old man needs help since he got laid up with a bad leg." "Where is the boy's mother?" Violet asked. "Dead," the man said. "Father, too. Been 2 years now." The way he said it, flat and matter-of-fact, told Violet that death was not uncommon out here, that loss was woven into the fabric of life in this hard country. "I am Violet Brennan," she said. "Colt Wilder," the man said. He did not offer his hand, and she was grateful for that small courtesy. The station master cleared his throat meaningfully. The sun had set, and darkness was gathering fast. "Decision time, miss," the station master said. Violet looked at her trunk, at the boarding house in the distance, at Colt Wilder waiting patiently for her answer. She thought about her dwindling money, about the fact that 50 cents a night and 20 cents for supper would leave her broke in less than a week. She thought about Daniel waiting in that terrible place, counting on her to somehow save him. She thought about the alternative, which was going back to Boston with nothing, with less than nothing, with failure wrapped around her like a shroud. "All right," she said. "I will come, but I want to see the place first, and I want to meet the old man and the boy before I agree to anything permanent." "Fair enough," Colt said. He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing, hefted it onto his shoulder, and started walking. Violet followed, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. They walked through the darkening town, past the saloon where lamplight spilled out onto the street, and voices rose in rough song, past the general store now closed and shuttered, past the church standing silent in the gathering night. At the edge of town, a buckboard wagon waited, hitched to a patient-looking horse. Colt loaded the trunk into the back, then offered Violet his hand to help her up onto the seat. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip strong and steady. He released her hand as soon as she was seated and walked around to climb up beside her. He clicked to the horse and they moved forward into darkness, leaving the scattered lights of Redemption Creek behind. The prairie at night was a different world. The sky stretched overhead in a vast dome scattered with more stars than Violet had ever seen in Boston, where gas lamps and smoke dimmed the heavens. The land rolled away on all sides in gentle swells, dark and vast and empty. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the steady clip of the horse's hooves, and the whisper of wind through grass. They rode in silence for perhaps 20 minutes. Violet studied Colt from the corner of her eye, trying to read him the way she had learned to read the men who came into the sewing shop where she had worked, the way she had learned to judge who would pay fairly and who would try to cheat her, who would keep his hands to himself and who would make her work while watching the door for escape. Colt sat easy on the wagon seat, reins loose in his hands, his attention on the road ahead. His profile was sharp against the starlit sky, all hard angles and shadows. He did not try to make conversation. He did not ask her questions or offer explanations. He simply drove, and somehow that silence felt more trustworthy than any words could have been. Finally, Violet spoke. "You knew Harrison would turn me down," she said. "That is why you were at the station." Colt glanced at her, then back at the road. "I was there to send a telegram," he said. "Harrison turning you down was not something I knew about beforehand. But you were not surprised," she said. Colt was quiet for a moment, considering. "Harrison does not do anything without a reason," he said. "If he asked for a mail-order bride and then refused her, he had a purpose in mind. Question is what that purpose was." Violet felt cold despite the warmth of the evening. "You know him," she said. "I know of him," Colt said. "Everyone around here does. Man owns half the county, controls most of the water rights, has his fingers in every business worth having fingers in. He is the kind of man who sees people as tools or obstacles, nothing in between." "Then why would he advertise for a bride in the first place?" Violet asked. "Maybe he wanted to make someone else jealous," Colt said. "Maybe he wanted to create a distraction while he worked some other angle. Maybe he just wanted to prove he could summon a woman across the country and then discard her. Men like Harrison do things for reasons the rest of us cannot always understand." Violet wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the sting of humiliation fresh again. "I was a fool to come," she said quietly. Colt shook his head. "You were desperate," he said. "There is a difference. Desperate people take risks. Sometimes those risks pay off, sometimes they do not. But taking the risk does not make you a fool. It makes you human." Something in his voice made Violet look at him more closely. There was understanding there, and more than that, there was experience. This was a man who knew what desperation felt like. The wagon crested a small rise and a house came into view, silhouetted against the stars. It was not large, just a simple wooden structure with a peaked roof and a small porch, but lamplight glowed warmly in the windows and smoke rose steady from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, dark and solid, and beyond it the land stretched away into darkness. Colt pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. Before he could climb down, the front door opened and an old man stepped out onto the porch, leaning heavily on a cane. He was perhaps 70, white-haired and bent, but his eyes were sharp and his voice, when he spoke, was strong. "This her?" he asked Colt. "This is Miss Violet Brennan," Colt said, climbing down and coming around to help Violet from the wagon. "Miss Brennan, this is Ned Walker." The old man studied Violet with the same careful attention she had seen in Colt's eyes. Then he nodded, satisfied with whatever he saw there. "You are welcome here, miss," he said. "Sorry about what happened to you in town. Harrison is a snake, always has been. Any woman who got away from marrying him ought to count herself lucky, even if it does not feel like it right now." Violet felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness in his voice. "Thank you," she managed. "Come inside," Ned said. "Supper is cold by now, but it is still good. You can meet Jesse. See if you think this arrangement might work." Violet followed Ned into the house, with Colt bringing her trunk behind them. The interior was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and worn wooden floors. A table stood in the center of the main room, set with mismatched plates and cups. A fire burned low in a stone fireplace, and in a chair pulled close to the warmth sat a small figure. Jesse was thin and pale, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and enormous brown eyes that watched Violet with the wariness of a wounded animal. He did not speak. He did not smile. He simply stared at her, his hands gripped tight in his lap. "This is my grandson Jesse," Ned said gently. "He does not talk much, has not since his folks died. But he is a good boy, smart, just needs someone patient with him." Violet understood immediately. This was not just about cooking and cleaning. This was about healing, or trying to. This was about taking a damaged child and helping him find his way back to something like wholeness. She walked slowly toward Jesse, keeping her movements careful and unthreatening. She knelt down beside his chair so that her eyes were level with his. "Hello, Jesse," she said softly. "My name is Violet. I am new here too, so we can figure things out together if you like." Jesse stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he gave a tiny nod. It was the smallest of gestures, barely there at all, but Violet felt something ease in her chest. She stood and turned back to Ned. "I will stay," she said. "We can try this for a week, see how it goes." Ned smiled, and the smile transformed his weathered face into something warm and grandfatherly. "Fair enough," he said. "Colt, show her to the spare room. Miss Brennan, you must be exhausted. We can talk details in the morning." Colt led Violet down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It held a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair by the window. It was simple and clean, and the bed had been made up with a quilt that looked handmade, stitched in shades of blue and green. "Door locks from the inside," Colt said, pointing to the bolt. "You have got privacy." "Thank you," Violet said. Colt set her trunk at the foot of the bed and turned to leave. At the door he paused. "What Harrison did to you," he said quietly. "It was not about you. Do not carry that shame. It belongs to him, not you." Before Violet could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She sat on the bed, her legs finally giving out from the exhaustion of the longest day of her life. Through the window she could see nothing but darkness and stars, vast and indifferent. She thought about Daniel, locked away in that terrible place, counting on her to somehow earn enough money to hire a lawyer, to get him released, to save him the way she had failed to save their parents. She thought about the humiliation at the train station, the cruel laughter, the messenger's flat voice reading Harrison's rejection like a weather report. She thought about Colt Wilder's rough hands and quiet voice, about old Ned's kindness, about Jesse's frightened eyes. This was not what she had planned. This was not the future she had imagined when she boarded that train in Boston. But it was something. It was a chance. It was a foothold when she had been falling. She lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, too tired even to unlace her boots. Through the thin walls she could hear the murmur of men's voices, Colt and Ned talking in the other room, and beyond that, the whisper of wind across empty prairie, that endless sound of a world too big to fully comprehend. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would begin again. Tomorrow she would learn to cook over a wood stove and care for a silent child and earn her $2 a week. Tomorrow she would start saving, penny by penny, toward the impossible sum she needed to free her brother. Tonight she would simply rest. But sleep did not come easily. Her mind kept returning to the train station, to the crowd's whispers, to the look on the messenger's face as he read Harrison's letter. She thought about the man himself, this Garrett Harrison, who wielded such power in this small corner of the world. She thought about what Colt had said, about Harrison having a purpose, about people being tools or obstacles. What purpose could there be in publicly humiliating a stranger? What could Harrison possibly gain from such cruelty? The questions followed her down into uneasy dreams, where she walked through endless corridors looking for a door that would not open, calling for Daniel in a voice that made no sound, running from shadows that had no faces, but carried the weight of judgment and shame. She woke once in the deep night, disoriented and afraid. Then she remembered the bolt on the door, remembered Colt's promise that he would not come uninvited, remembered the warmth in Ned's voice when he called her welcome. She was not safe, not really. She was still desperate, still nearly penniless, still trapped in a strange place among strangers with a brother who needed her and no clear path forward. But she was alive. She had survived the worst day of humiliation she could imagine, and she was still breathing, still thinking, still planning. That would have to be enough. She pulled the quilt up around her shoulders and let exhaustion finally claim her, pulling her down into deeper sleep where the dreams could not quite reach. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its challenges and uncertainties. Tonight, she would simply rest in this small room with its locked door and handmade quilt, and try to believe that somewhere in this vast and lonely country there might still be room for hope. Morning came too early, announced by a rooster crowing somewhere near the barn, and the pale gray light of dawn seeping through the small window. Violet woke with her dress wrinkled and twisted around her legs, her hair fallen completely from its pins, and the stale taste of exhaustion in her mouth. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. Then memory returned in a rush. The train station, the letter, Colt Wilder and his quiet offer, this small room with its locked door and blue quilt. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. 3 days on a train followed by the emotional devastation of yesterday had left her feeling bruised in ways that went deeper than physical tiredness. But she could hear sounds from the other part of the house now, the clank of a kettle, low voices, the scrape of a chair across wooden floor. Life continuing, indifferent to her pain. She stood and moved to the washstand, where someone had left a pitcher of fresh water and a clean towel. She poured water into the basin and washed her face, the cold shocking her fully awake. She unpinned what remained of her hairstyle and brushed it out with the small brush from her trunk, then twisted it back into a simple knot at the base of her neck. She changed into a plain brown dress, more suitable for work than the blue calico she had worn yesterday. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes looked older somehow, haunted by something that had not been there a week ago. She unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted from the main room, and her stomach clenched with sudden hunger. She had not eaten since a stale roll purchased at a station stop the previous morning, more than 24 hours ago. In the main room, Ned sat at the table with a cup of coffee, his bad leg propped on a second chair. Jessie was there too, perched on a stool near the fireplace, watching the flames with that same distant expression Violet had seen the night before. Colt stood at the stove, tending a skillet of bacon, with the careful attention of someone who had learned to cook out of necessity rather than pleasure. He glanced up when Violet entered, nodded once in greeting, then turned back to the stove. "Coffee is on the table," Ned said, gesturing to a pot sitting on a folded cloth. "Cups in the cupboard there. Make yourself at home." Violet poured herself coffee and sat at the table. The coffee was strong and bitter, and exactly what she needed. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and let the heat seep into her fingers. "Sleep all right?" Ned asked. "Well enough," Violet lied. "Thank you for the room." Ned waved a hand dismissively. "You will earn it, and then some. I am not much use with this leg, and Colt here is better with horses than housework. Having someone who can cook proper meals and keep the place from falling to pieces will be a blessing." Colt brought the skillet to the table, along with a plate of biscuits that looked store-bought and slightly stale. He served bacon onto 4 plates with an economy of movement that spoke of long practice at living alone, at making do with simple food and simple comforts. They ate in near silence. Jessie picked at his food, eating slowly, his eyes fixed on his plate. Violet watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the thinness of his wrists, the shadows under his eyes, the way he held himself, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. This was a child who had learned to make himself small, to avoid notice, to expect nothing. After breakfast, Ned outlined Violet's duties: cooking 3 meals a day, keeping the house clean, doing laundry once a week, tending a small vegetable garden behind the house that had been neglected since Ned's injury, and most importantly, looking after Jesse, making sure he ate properly, keeping him occupied, watching for any sign that he might be emerging from the silence that had claimed him. "I know it is a lot," Ned said, "but $2 a week is fair for the work, and you will have room and board besides. If you can make it stretch, you might have a bit to save. $2 a week." Violet did the calculation quickly in her head. $8 a month. Maybe $96 in a year if she could save every penny. The lawyer she had consulted in Boston, the one who had told her Daniel's case might be winnable with proper representation, had quoted her a fee of $200. At this rate, it would take more than 2 years to save enough, and that assumed she spent nothing on herself, needed nothing, never got sick or injured or faced any unexpected cost. It felt impossible, but impossible was better than nothing. Impossible at least had a number attached to it, a goal to work toward, however distant. "I will make it work," she said. After breakfast, Colt excused himself to tend to the horses and whatever other work needed doing outside. Ned settled in a chair near the window with a newspaper that looked several days old, and Violet began to explore the kitchen properly, taking stock of what she had to work with. The pantry was sparse but functional. Flour, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, a few cans of vegetables. No fresh produce except for some potatoes and onions that had seen better days. The stove was old but well maintained, the kind that required attention and skill to manage properly. She had cooked on similar stoves in the boarding house where she had lived with Daniel after their father died, back when she was working at the dress shop and trying to keep them both fed on almost nothing. She spent the morning cleaning, sweeping floors that had accumulated months of bachelor neglect, washing dishes that had been stacked haphazardly in a basin, wiping down surfaces sticky with spilled coffee and old grease. Jesse followed her at a distance, never speaking, but always watching. She tried talking to him as she worked, keeping her voice gentle and conversational, not expecting answers, but wanting him to hear a kind voice, to know that someone saw him. The vegetable garden behind the house was a tangle of weeds and dead plants. Whatever had been growing there had long since given up. Violet stood looking at it, mentally calculating what it would take to bring it back to life. The soil looked good beneath the weeds. The location had sun. With work and water and some seeds, it could produce food again. She found tools in the barn, a rusty hoe and a spade with a cracked handle. She began working the soil, pulling weeds, clearing dead growth. It was hard physical labor, and her hands, soft from months of sewing, blistered quickly. But there was something satisfying in it, something that felt like building rather than destroying, like creating possibility in a place that had nearly given up on it. Jesse appeared beside her after a while, watching. She handed him a basket. "Help me gather these weeds," she said. "We will pile them over there and let them dry, then we can burn them." Jesse hesitated, then took the basket. He worked beside her in silence, and Violet felt a small victory in that simple cooperation. Midday came. She made a simple meal of beans and cornbread, nothing fancy but filling. Colt came in from outside, his shirt dark with sweat, his hands and face dusty. He washed at the pump outside before sitting down to eat. They ate again in near silence, but it felt less awkward than breakfast had, as if they were all settling into a rhythm, learning the patterns of shared space. After lunch, Violet found Ned alone on the porch, his bad leg still propped up, a pipe in his hand, though it was not lit. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Ned gestured to the chair beside him. "Ask away." Violet sat. "Why did Colt really bring me here? The truth, I mean." Ned was quiet for a moment, studying his unlit pipe. "Colt is a complicated man," he said finally. "Got his own ghosts chasing him. But he is good people, Miss Brennan. When he saw what happened to you at that station, saw Harrison humiliate you like that, it hit something in him, reminded him of his own pain maybe, or maybe he just recognized someone who needed help and had the means to offer it. Either way, you are safe here. I would stake my life on that." "What ghosts?" Violet asked quietly. Ned looked at her, measuring how much to tell. 6 years back, Colt was a deputy sheriff down in Abilene, Kansas. Had a wife, little girl, loved them more than life itself. One day a gang of outlaws came through, robbed the bank, shot up the town. Colt went after them, tracked them into the hills. Was gone 3 days. When he came back, found his house had been burned to the ground. The gang did it for revenge, for daring to chase them. His wife and daughter were inside. Violet felt her breath catch. Oh, God. Colt tracked those men for 6 months, Ned continued. Found 3 of them, brought them to justice. The 4th one got away. That was 6 years ago. Since then, Colt has been drifting. Never stays in one place more than a season. Never lets himself get close to anyone. Just works, moves on, works, moves on. I met him 2 years back when he was passing through. We became friends, as much as Colt lets anyone be his friend. He has been helping me out since I hurt my leg, staying longer than he usually does in one place. I think maybe he is getting tired of running, but he does not know how to stop. Violet sat with this information, understanding suddenly the shadows she had seen in Colt's eyes, the careful distance he maintained. "The 4th man," she said. "The one who got away. Did Colt ever find him?" Ned looked out across the prairie, his expression troubled. "He found him," Ned said quietly. "Or rather, he found out where he is. Man goes by Frank Deacon now, works as foreman at Harrison Ranch." Violet felt something cold settle in her stomach. So Colt did not just happen to be at the station. He is here because of Harrison. "Partly," Ned admitted. "But do not think that makes his offer to you any less genuine. Colt is many things, but he is not a liar. He saw someone in trouble, and he helped. That is the truth of it." They sat in silence for a while. Violet tried to process this new information, to understand the complicated web of past and present that had brought her to this place. She had thought she was running from her own troubles, but it seemed everyone here was running from something, or towards something, or maybe both at once. That afternoon, Colt came to find her in the garden where she was still working. He stood at the edge of the plot, watching her pull weeds from soil that was slowly beginning to look like it might support life again. "You know how to ride?" he asked. Violet sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "A horse? No. You should learn," he said. "Out here, not knowing how to ride is like not knowing how to walk. Limits where you can go, what you can do." "I have no horse," Violet pointed out. "You can use one of mine," Colt said, "just for learning. Come on, might as well start now." Violet stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. She followed Colt to the barn where 2 horses stood in adjacent stalls, one a large bay gelding, the other a smaller mare with a gentle eye. "This is Rosie," Colt said, leading the mare out. "She is patient with beginners." Violet noticed the slight catch in his voice when he said the name, and remembered what Ned had told her. His daughter had been named Rosie. He had named his horse after his dead child. Colt showed her how to approach the horse, how to let Rosie smell her hand, how to stroke her neck. The mare was warm and solid under Violet's palm, her coat smooth as silk. There was something calming about the animal's presence, something steady and real. He showed her how to mount, giving her a boost up when her own strength was not enough. She found herself suddenly very high off the ground, perched on the mare's back with no clear idea of how to control this large animal beneath her. Colt handed her the reins, then mounted his own horse in one fluid motion. He brought his gelding alongside Rosie and reached over to adjust Violet's grip on the reins. "Not too tight," he said. "She will feel your tension. Horses are sensitive. They respond to confidence, to calm. You got to convince her you know what you are doing even when you do not." His hand covered hers for a moment, correcting her position, and Violet was suddenly very aware of the warmth of his palm, the rough calluses, the strength in his fingers. She looked at his face, so close to hers, and saw something shift in his expression. For just a moment his careful mask slipped and she saw the man beneath, the grieving father, the lonely wanderer, the hunter still searching for justice or revenge or maybe just closure. Then he pulled his hand away and the moment passed. They rode slowly across the prairie, staying close to the house at first. Colt coached her through the basics: how to sit, how to guide with the reins, how to move with the horse rather than against it. Violet gripped the reins too tightly at first, her whole body tense with fear of falling, but gradually, as Rosie proved patient and steady, she began to relax. The prairie stretched around them in all directions, endless grass rippling in waves under the wind. The sky was so vast it made Violet feel tiny, insignificant, and yet somehow that feeling was not entirely unpleasant. In Boston, she had always felt crushed by the weight of buildings and crowds, by the press of too many people in too small a space. Here, the emptiness felt like freedom, like possibility. "You are doing well," Colt said after a while. "Better than I expected for a city girl." "I am tougher than I look," Violet said. "I am starting to see that," Colt replied. They rode in silence for a few minutes. Then Violet gathered her courage and spoke. "Ned told me about your family, about Abilene. I am so sorry." Colt's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Ned talks too much," he said. "He cares about you," Violet said. "He wanted me to understand." "Understand what?" Colt asked, his voice harder now. "Why you helped me," Violet said. "Why you keep your distance. Why you look like a man who is waiting for something but does not know what." Colt pulled his horse to a stop. Violet managed to halt Rosie beside him. They sat there on horseback in the middle of endless grass under endless sky, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I should not have told you to learn to ride," Colt said finally. "Should not have brought you out here. I forget sometimes that being kind just makes things harder when I leave." "Are you leaving?" Violet asked. "Eventually," Colt said. "I always leave." "What if you stayed?" Violet said quietly. Colt looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw pain in his eyes so deep it made her chest ache. "I do not get to stay," he said. "I do not get to have that anymore. I had it once and I lost it, and that was my one chance." "You do not believe that," Violet said. "Yes, I do," Colt said, "and you should too. We are both running from things we cannot outrun, Miss Brennan. Only difference is, you still think there is something at the end of the running. I know better." He turned his horse and started back toward the house. Violet followed, her heart heavy with the weight of his words and the truth they carried. That evening, as Violet was preparing supper, a rider appeared on the horizon. Colt saw him first and went out to meet him before he could reach the house. Violet watched through the window as the two men talked, their voices too low to hear, but their body language tense. The rider wore the same vest with the embroidered H that the messenger at the train station had worn, Harrison's man. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. The rider handed Colt an envelope, tipped his hat, and rode away. Colt stood holding the envelope for a long moment before coming back inside. He handed it to Violet without a word. Her name was written on the front in elegant script. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper with a brief message. "Miss Brennan, I have reconsidered my hasty decision. I would like to meet with you to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Please come to Harrison Ranch this Saturday at 2 o'clock. A carriage will be sent for you. Sincerely, Garrett Harrison." Violet read it twice, trying to understand. Why would Harrison suddenly want to see her? What had changed in the 3 days since he had publicly humiliated her? "It is a trap," Colt said flatly. "You do not know that," Violet said, though her instincts agreed with him. "I know Harrison," Colt said. "He does not reconsider. He does not apologize. If he wants to see you, it is because he thinks you can be useful to him somehow." Ned had wheeled his chair over to see what the fuss was about. He read the note over Violet's shoulder and frowned. "Boy is right," he said. "Harrison never does anything without 5 layers of scheming underneath. Question is, what does he want from you?" Violet thought about this. What could she possibly have that Harrison would want? She was nobody, nothing, a failed mail-order bride with $3 to her name and a brother in prison. She had no connections, no influence, no resources. Unless Harrison knew about Daniel. Unless someone had told him about her brother, about the reason she had come west in the first place. But how could he know? She had told no one. She looked at the note again, studying the elegant handwriting, the expensive paper. This was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, who saw the world as a game and other people as pieces to be moved around the board. "I will go," she said. "Absolutely not," Colt said. "I have to know what he wants," Violet insisted. "I have to understand what his game is. Then I am coming with you," Colt said. "No," Violet said. "If you come, if he sees you there, it changes everything. This has to be between him and me." Colt looked like he wanted to argue, but Ned spoke up. "Let her go," he said quietly. "Let her hear what the snake has to say. Then she can decide what to do with the information. But Colt, you follow at a distance. Stay close enough to help if things go wrong." Colt wanted to refuse. Violet could see it in every line of his body. But he nodded, accepting Ned's wisdom. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work and worry. Violet threw herself into her tasks, cleaning and cooking and tending the garden with fierce concentration, as if by working hard enough she could somehow control the outcome of Saturday's meeting. Jessie began to open up slightly, not speaking but willing to help with small tasks, to sit near her while she worked, to accept her presence as something stable in his uncertain world. Colt taught her to ride every afternoon, and she grew more comfortable in the saddle, more confident in her ability to control the horse. He also taught her to shoot, setting up bottles on fence posts and showing her how to hold a pistol, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. The gun was heavier than she expected, and the recoil shocked her the first time she fired it. But she practiced until she could hit the bottles more often than she missed them. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked after one session. "Because out here, knowing how to defend yourself is not optional," Colt said, "and because I will not always be around to do it for you." The words hung in the air between them, a reminder of his intention to eventually leave, to keep running from whatever it was he could not face. Saturday came. A carriage arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, black and polished, pulled by matched horses. The driver was a young man with cold eyes and a gun on his hip. He said nothing, just waited while Violet climbed in. She had dressed in her best remaining dress, the blue calico she had worn on the train, now cleaned and pressed. She had pinned her hair up carefully and washed her face and hands. She wanted to look presentable, wanted to face Harrison with as much dignity as she could muster. Colt stood in the doorway watching her leave. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw worry in his face and something else, something that looked almost like fear, though she could not imagine what a man like Colt Wilder could possibly be afraid of. "Be careful," he said. "I will," she promised. The ride to Harrison Ranch took 30 minutes. The land here was different from the rough prairie around Ned's place. This was cultivated territory, fenced pastures full of cattle, fields of crops growing in neat rows, buildings freshly painted and well-maintained. This was wealth, power, control over the land and everything on it. The main house stood at the end of a long drive, a sprawling 2-story structure that looked like it belonged in a city rather than on the frontier. White paint gleamed in the afternoon sun. Black shutters framed large windows. A wide porch wrapped around the front, furnished with rocking chairs and hanging baskets of flowers that seemed absurdly delicate out here in this hard country. The driver helped Violet down from the carriage and led her to the front door. A housekeeper answered, an older woman in a severe black dress who looked Violet up and down with disapproval. "This way," she said, and led Violet through a hallway decorated with paintings and expensive furniture, everything designed to impress and intimidate. They stopped at a door. The housekeeper knocked once, then opened it. "Miss Brennan, sir," she announced. Violet stepped into what appeared to be a study, Leather-bound books lined the walls. A massive desk dominated the room. And behind that desk sat Garrett Harrison. He was younger than Violet had expected, perhaps 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples and sharp features that might have been handsome if they held any warmth. He wore an expensive suit, and his hands, resting on the desk, were clean and manicured. These were not the hands of a man who worked his own land. These were the hands of a man who gave orders and watched others do the work. "Miss Brennan," he said, rising and gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Violet sat, keeping her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She would not let this man see her fear. Harrison resumed his seat and studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I imagine you are wondering why I asked you here," he said. "The thought had crossed my mind," Violet said, keeping her voice steady. Harrison smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I have made some inquiries about you, Miss Brennan, about your background, your family situation. It is quite interesting reading." Violet felt ice form in her stomach. He knew. Somehow he knew about Daniel. "I do not know what you think you have discovered," she said carefully. "Oh, I think you do," Harrison said. "Your brother Daniel, 16 years old, currently serving time in the Boston House of Reformation for theft. Convicted a year ago. Eligible for early release with proper legal representation. But of course, proper legal representation costs money. Money you do not have." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That is why you answered my advertisement, is it not? You were desperate for any opportunity to earn enough to hire a lawyer. You needed to save your brother. How very noble." Violet said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had her cornered, and he knew it. "I can help you," Harrison continued. "I have connections, lawyers who owe me favors. I could have your brother released within a month. All charges cleared. He could start fresh, build a real life." Violet's heart was pounding. "What is the price?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Marriage," he said simply. "You marry me, become Mrs. Garrett Harrison. In exchange, I free your brother and provide for both of you. You will have security, comfort, a position of respect in the community. Your brother will have a future instead of a criminal record." "Why?" Violet asked. "Why would you want to marry someone you publicly rejected?" "Because you proved yourself," Harrison said. "Most women would have crawled back to wherever they came from after what I did to you. But you stayed. You found work. You survived. That shows strength, Miss Brennan, and I need a wife with strength." "This is not about love," Violet said. "Of course not," Harrison agreed. "This is a business arrangement. I need a wife who can manage a household, represent me in society, and not require emotional attachment. You need money and influence to save your brother. We can each give the other what they need." "And if I refuse?" Violet asked. Harrison shrugged. "Then your brother stays where he is, and I will make sure that Ned Walker loses his property for failure to pay back taxes. Colt Wilder will have to move on, and you will be back where you started, with nothing and no one." Violet felt fury rise in her chest, hot and wild. But before she could speak, Harrison leaned forward across his desk, his eyes glittering with cold amusement. "And just so you understand the full scope of your situation, Miss Brennan," he said quietly, "I have been in correspondence with a lawyer from Boston, a Mr. Marcus Reed. He has been most helpful in providing information about your family troubles. Most helpful indeed." Violet's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. Marcus Reed. That name, spoken aloud in this place so far from Boston, hit her like a physical blow. The man who had tried to destroy her life. The man who had claimed little Emma as his property. Who had threatened to have Violet arrested for kidnapping. Who had driven her from the only city she had ever known, with his wealth and his lawyers, and his absolute conviction that he could take whatever he wanted. "I see you recognize the name," Harrison said, watching her face with the satisfaction of a cat cornering a mouse. "Mr. Reed was quite interested to learn where you had gone. Quite interested indeed. He asked me to pass along a message. Something about unfinished business regarding a child. A little girl, I believe. Emma, was it? Violet's hands clenched into fists in her lap. Her nails bit into her palms hard enough to draw blood, but she barely felt it. "How did you find him?" she whispered. Harrison waved a hand dismissively. "I make it my business to know everything about anyone who might be useful to me. When you arrived claiming to be my intended bride, I had inquiries made. Your past is quite interesting, Miss Brennan. A seamstress who took in an orphan child only to have a wealthy lawyer claim the girl as his illegitimate daughter. You fled rather than face charges. Very dramatic." "She is not his daughter," Violet said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "He never cared about her until he realized she could inherit money from his estate. He wanted to use her. I protected her." "I am sure you did," Harrison said smoothly. "But the law sees things differently. Mr. Reed has a court order from Boston naming him as the child's legal guardian. You, on the other hand, are a fugitive. He could have you arrested at any time, unless, of course, you have protection. My protection." Violet felt the trap closing around her completely now. It was not just Daniel. Harrison held two lives over her head like twin swords ready to fall. Her brother and the little girl she had loved like a daughter, both of them pawns in Harrison's game. "Leave her alone," Violet said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Emma is safe. She is far from here. You cannot touch her." Harrison smiled, and it was the coldest expression Violet had ever seen on a human face. "I have no interest in the child," he said, "but Mr. Reed does, and he is willing to pay handsomely for information about your whereabouts. He wants to know where little Emma is hidden. He wants to finish what you interrupted when you spirited her away. Now, I could tell him where to find you, or I could tell him you died crossing the prairie, tragic accident, no forwarding address. Which story I tell depends entirely on your answer to my proposal." Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You see, Miss Brennan, this is not just about your brother anymore. This is about a child's future. If you refuse me, I contact Reed. He comes west with his lawyers and his court orders. He finds you. He finds the girl. And then the law, which cares nothing for love or protection or good intentions, gives her to a man who sees her as nothing more than a key to unlock an inheritance. Is that what you want?" Violet could not breathe. The room was spinning. Every path led to destruction. If she refused Harrison, he would tell Reed where to find her. Reed would come. He would find Emma. The little girl Violet had saved, the child she had protected by sending her away to safety with a trusted friend in Canada, would be dragged back into Reed's world of cold calculation and legal manipulation. But if she accepted Harrison's proposal, she would be selling herself into a different kind of slavery. A marriage without love, without hope, bound to a man who collected people like he collected property. "You would destroy innocent people just to force my hand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would use whatever leverage is necessary to achieve my goals," Harrison said calmly. "That is how power works, Miss Brennan. You will learn that as my wife." Violet stood, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course," Harrison said. "You have until Monday. 2 days to consider. Choose wisely." The housekeeper appeared to escort Violet out. She walked through that elegant house in a daze, climbed into the carriage, and rode back to Ned's place in silence. Colt was waiting when she arrived. He took one look at her face and knew something terrible had happened. Inside, she told them everything. Harrison's offer, his threats, the impossible choice he had laid before her. Colt exploded with rage, pacing the room like a caged animal. "I will kill him," he said. "I will ride over there right now and put a bullet in him." "That would only make things worse," Ned said quietly. "He would have the law on you within an hour. He owns the sheriff, probably the judge, too." "Then what do we do?" Colt demanded. They looked at Violet. The decision was hers. She thought about Daniel, locked away in that terrible place, his future destroyed before it had really begun. She thought about Ned and Jesse. who would lose their home if Harrison carried out his threat. She thought about Colt, who had already lost everything once and could not bear to lose again. She thought about the life Harrison was offering: comfort, security, the power to help the people she cared about. All it would cost was her freedom, her dignity, her soul. "I do not know," she whispered. "I do not know what to do." Jesse, who had been sitting silent in the corner as always, suddenly stood. He walked to Violet and put his small hand in hers. It was the first time he had voluntarily touched anyone since his parents died. He looked up at her with those enormous brown eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, Jesse spoke. "Do not go," he said, his voice rusty from disuse but clear as a bell. "Please do not go." Violet pulled him into her arms and held him tight, this damaged child who had finally found his voice, and she began to cry. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and in that small house on the edge of nowhere, 4 people, who had all lost everything, sat together in the gathering dark and tried to find a way forward that did not require another sacrifice, another loss, another piece of themselves given up to the hunger of a cruel world. But none of them could see a path that did not end in pain. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Violet had not slept. She had spent the night sitting by the window in her small room, watching stars wheel across the black sky, trying to find an answer that would save everyone, and knowing that no such answer existed. Every path led to loss. Every choice meant sacrifice. When dawn finally broke, painting the eastern horizon in shades of rose and gold, she had still not decided what to tell Harrison. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow she would have to give her answer. She dressed in her plain brown work dress and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. Her hands moved automatically through familiar tasks: building up the fire in the stove, setting coffee to boil, mixing batter for biscuits. The routine was comforting in its simplicity, a reminder that even when the world was falling apart, people still needed to eat. Life still continued in small, ordinary ways. Ned was already awake, sitting at the table with his bad leg propped up as usual. He looked like he had not slept either. His eyes were shadowed, and his face seemed older somehow, carved deeper with lines of worry. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," Violet replied. They did not speak about Harrison, or the choice, or any of it. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said a dozen times the night before. Colt came in from outside where he had apparently been working since before sunrise. His shirt was already dark with sweat, despite the early hour. He poured himself coffee and stood drinking it by the window, staring out at the prairie as if he could find answers written in the grass and sky. Jesse appeared last, moving quietly as always, but there was something different about him now. Since speaking those 3 words yesterday, he had not retreated entirely back into silence. He had said good morning to Ned before bed last night. Small words, simple words, but each one a miracle. They ate breakfast in heavy silence. Violet had just begun clearing the dishes when they heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching fast. Colt was at the window instantly, his hand moving to the gun he wore at his hip. 6 riders, he said, his voice tight. Harrison's men, all armed. Ned struggled to his feet, reaching for the rifle that hung above the fireplace. "Get Jesse into the cellar," he said to Violet. "Now." Violet grabbed Jesse's hand and pulled him toward the trapdoor in the kitchen floor that led to the root cellar. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but he did not resist. She lifted the door, helped him down the ladder, then followed him into the cool darkness below. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "No matter what you hear, stay quiet." She could hear boots on the porch above them now, voices, the front door opening. She left Jesse in the cellar and climbed back up, unable to hide while others faced danger. In the main room, 6 men had crowded inside. They wore the same vests with the embroidered H. They all had guns. And at the front stood a man Violet recognized from her visit to Harrison Ranch, Frank Deacon, the foreman. the man who had killed Colt's family. Colt stood very still, his hand near his gun, but not touching it. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "Harrison sent us with a message," Frank said. "He wants an answer today, not tomorrow, today." "The lady has until tomorrow," Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. That was the agreement. "Agreements change," Frank said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Harrison is an impatient man. He wants to know if Miss Brennan will be his wife, and he wants to know now." Violet stepped forward before Colt could respond. "Tell Mr. Harrison that I need the time he promised me. I will give him my answer tomorrow." Frank shook his head slowly. "Not good enough. See, Mr. Harrison thinks maybe you are getting bad advice from your friends here, thinks maybe they are convincing you to refuse his generous offer. So he sent us to make sure you understand the consequences of refusal." He gestured to the men behind him. Two of them moved quickly, grabbing Ned before the old man could bring his rifle to bear. They shoved him back into his chair, and one of them casually backhanded him across the face. The sound of the blow echoed in the small room. Colt moved then, fast as a snake strike, his gun clearing leather. But Frank was faster. He had his own gun out and pressed against Violet's temple before Colt could aim. "Drop it," Frank said calmly, "or I paint the wall with her brains." Colt froze, his gun half raised, his eyes locked on Frank's face. Violet could see murder in those blue eyes, a cold fury that promised death. But he could not shoot, not with Frank's gun against her head. Slowly, carefully, Colt lowered his weapon and set it on the table. "Smart man," Frank said. He kept his gun pressed to Violet's head but turned to address the room. "Here is how this works. Miss Brennan is coming with us, back to Harrison Ranch. She is going to marry Mr. Harrison today, right now, nice and legal. Or we burn this house to the ground with everyone in it. Your choice." Violet felt the cold circle of the gun barrel against her skin. She could smell Frank's breath, tobacco and whiskey. She could see Colt's hands clenched into fists, the muscles in his jaw working as he fought to control himself. "I will go," she said quietly. "Just leave them alone." "Violet, no," Colt said. "It is the only way," Violet said. She looked at Ned, at the blood trickling from his split lip. She thought of Jesse hiding in the cellar. These people had given her shelter when she had nothing. She would not let them die for her sake. "Smart girl," Frank said. He lowered the gun from her head but kept it pointed at her. "Get your things. You have 5 minutes." Violet walked to her room on shaking legs. She could hear the men in the main room, their rough laughter, the sound of furniture being knocked over. They were destroying the place, making their point: power, control, the ability to hurt people and face no consequences. She grabbed her small bag and threw in a few items: her mother's Bible, the photograph of Daniel, her sewing kit. She had just picked up her hairbrush when she heard breaking glass from the main room, then Ned's voice raised in protest, then a sickening thud and silence. She ran back to find Ned on the floor, unconscious, blood pooling beneath his head. One of Harrison's men stood over him with a fireplace poker in his hand. "You killed him!" Violet screamed. "Not yet," Frank said. "But we will if you do not come quietly. Now move." Colt knelt beside Ned, his hands checking for a pulse. The old